So at the time I'm writing these words, there are already lots of podcasts out there about the histories of nations or eras or certain topics. This one is instead more or less about the history of a family. Why though? Why not do a history of Florence or a history of the Renaissance podcast? Well, part of it is that I just want this project to stand out more, sure. But another big part is also personal interest, as it should be with any project you're going to invest tons of time and even money into. I've always been fascinated by dynasties, families whose personal relationships and dysfunctions intersect with power. The Julio-Claudians, the Ptolemies, the Plantagenets, the Stuarts, the Qin, the Spanish Bourbons, the Kennedys. I can read about them or binge on a cheesy documentary series about them all day. So why the Medici? Well, it's not just that they were celebrated patrons of the arts who helped get the Renaissance rolling, nor is it just that they were neck-deep in Renaissance-era intrigue, even if among modern historians they are, justifiably or not, less notorious for that kind of thing than the Borgias or the Sforzas. Nor is it because I'm from an Italian-American background, which, to be honest, I'm not. I'm really sorry if you're one of those people annoyed by English language history podcasts done by people not from whatever country they're discussing. But for what it's worth, I am a historian, and I have done research into northern Italy in the 17th and 18th centuries. And as I'm about to discuss, the world the Medici helped bring about is a world that belongs to all of us. My real interest in the Medici and my decision to do this podcast were driven by my academic specialization in so-called early modern Europe, which is generally seen as the era from the fall of Constantinople in 1453 to the outbreak of the French Revolution in 1789. Unless you're English, then it's seen as starting with 1485 with the Battle of Bosworth Field, that ended with King Henry VII taking the English throne from Richard III. The English are like that. The Medici were right there and even played a part, however small, in the creation of the modern Western world. They rose to wealth and prominence through the development of what would become modern capitalism in the stalls of the money changers of Florence. Their patronage was not only behind famous names who shaped modern art, literature, and architecture, like Machiavelli, Raphael, Leonardo da Vinci, and Peter Paul Rubens, but also the reintroduction of ancient Greek writings largely unknown to Western Europe by then, like the complete works of Plato. They were also behind the painting of the Sistine Chapel and the invention of the piano. A queen and two popes from the family had leading roles to play in the drama of the Reformation. The scientific accomplishments of Galileo, as well as his persecution and trial, took place under the watch of a Medici Grand Duke. And the last Medici Grand Duke was one of the earlier enlightened despots, trying to put the principles of the burgeoning Enlightenment into practice, as well as a well-documented, indisputably gay man who lived before the 19th century when the term homosexual was first coined. In sum, they were a family whose story unfolded with the rise of modernity in the backdrop. Now, I'm not just going to talk about the Medici. As interesting as they are in their own, I think to get the full story you have to dive deep into the context. So for that purpose, I'm actually not going to start the story with the Medici themselves. Rather, our story begins centuries before the first recorded mention of any member of the family. I want to pick up with the fall of the Western Roman Empire, and how Italy went from being a united kingdom to a land divided between warring cities and countries. This multi-episode prelude will look at the history of Florence as well, and the origins of the Republic that the Medici would eventually take over and then completely dismantle. Over the course of the show, I'll probably have various tangent episodes about topics that I think listeners might find interesting, like famous historical figures who weren't Medici but were involved with them, Tuscan cuisine from the Renaissance era and its influence on modern Italian food, and so on. So, if any of that sounds appealing, and more importantly, you don't dislike my voice too much, hop on board, and let's talk about how the Medici went from being a family of middle-class bankers to becoming royalty, and in the process did their own part in forming the cultural and economic landscape we live with today, for better and for worse.